every one of these Mutant Year Zero RPG game books have their own little gimmick, their own little mini game that you play every session, that you track and you trace it. Things like with GenLab Alpha, the war against the machines, by the resistance, and with Mechatron, the state of the city and all the power levels. And the way that Mutant Year Zero Actual does it is via the stats of the Ark, the place where you and all the other mutants live together, your colony. It has 4 different stats, and these 4 different stats basically have different development levels, which will affect the way of life and the kind of services that are available to you within the Ark, until you find a way to raise those 4 stats to a point at which you can then undertake improvements. So it's that sort of colony management simulator element that you do every session, and so the players are working together constantly to improve their home. I like that. Plus, you've also then got the away team stuff, so then you go out and you do that. So you organise your base and then you go off and explore. So there's the 2 aspects to the gameplay. The development levels, the 4 stats that the colony, the Ark, has are food, culture, technology, and warfare. And of course, there are things that can hit the colony, setbacks that can occur, and those can be like chosen or rolled randomly. And if the colony is prepared in one of those 4 areas in particular, at the exclusion of another, then, for example, if like randomly or whatever, one of the setbacks came along that were in that weak point, then the colony's really going to get hurt by whatever that event is. The obvious one being, say, warfare. If you have a particularly low warfare, then you are going to have a battle level, which means if the colony ever comes under attack from any invaders, then the invaders would have a battle level, and there's kind of a mini game, kind of a versus dice dealy that happens to determine the outcome of that battle against your colony. So we've got all that happening as well within the game. Pretty nifty, huh? Things like food supply, they have an overarching element more than just the thematic of here's how the struggle is going on for food around you. So-and-so looks a bit thin. Rather than that, there's also the elements of it can reduce the amount of every session deaths. You basically roll for an amount of deaths per session, a d6 of deaths, and it can minus off that d6 of deaths through conditions, and it's basically a whole combination of all those kinds of things where mutants might die in the Ark, and it's handled by a d6 at the end of every session. And a higher food supply level, for example, lessens that, takes it the session body count down by increasingly higher amounts. And culture and technology, the 2 other stats that you shouldn't overlook, because those things are the psychological aid for you. So yeah, basically done a printout of the development levels sheet there, so that I can make quick reference to it when we need to. Now the other thing, at the start of every session, or during this session, whatever, the players hold an assembly. I mean, if they aren't actually in the Ark at the time, then I'd have a mind maybe to wait till they get back and then hold an assembly or whatever. And in the assembly, the party decide together, but basically they get to be the bosses of the Ark, even though they aren't. Well, one of them might well be as the class, but they get to basically make the decision for the people of what project the people have chosen to undertake. That episode. And by project, it's basically an attempt at an improvement of the Ark. And these different projects, so you'd vote, you'd decide on one as a group. These different projects have different numbers of work points required to complete them. So starting right from the very beginning of the list, we'll look at the Defences project. That's the first one listed here. And they list it by difficulty of development requirement. Some of them like that one, has no development requirement, i.e. those 4 stats that I just mentioned, those are the development levels. Some of these projects, for you to even start them, require a minimum development level. So you have to kind of get up to that point before you can be in a state to take it on. So you've always got something to work towards in that sense. So, you know, the mini game, it looks quite fun. The defences, you know, building palisades, earthworks, or even a moat protects the ark against enemies on the outside and makes it harder to slip in or out unnoticed. No development requirement. The skills are force or scout. So we'll get onto that in a sec. And the work points are 2 times the number of PCs. So, and there's a dev bonus. I'll explain what those 4 things mean. Once you understand that, you'll understand that all the projects have that as their listing, basically. So the dev requirement, you know what that is. Some of the other things, for instance, are going to start requiring, like heliograph will require a dev requirement of technology 20. And right from the very beginning, you're given 12 points with which to distribute across those 4 stats. So you can see hitting 20, you know, you can't be doing that from the beginning. Even if you put everything into one stat, you'd have 12 in a stat, which at least gets you up into the tier 2 of that stat area. Okay, so dev requirement, yes, skills, force or scout. So, and work points, we'll cover them together. 2 times the number of PCs in this case. Sometimes it's like 1 times the number of PCs. So we take the amount of player characters in the group. You might have a group of 4. So to do the defences one, it's going to take 8 work points to complete it. And then all the players during that session at an appropriate time can attempt to describe what they're doing to help the defences. And basically they get to help themselves doing it, but also kind of describe what the people are doing, but use their role to kind of do it. So it's kind of like the inspiration from the player characters, because they are real, like, driving characters within the arc. So you can either use your force skill or your scout skill. So you choose which one. And so one player in the party might say, well, I'm going to you know, look around for the right kind of things to use, the right kind of places. I'm going to try and, you know, use some binoculars and check the horizon, see if there's a good bit of sheet metal that can be recovered, or I'm going to look around and find something like that. Oh yeah, okay. Meanwhile, I'm going to come with you and actually carry them with the labourers and put them in place. So that would be the force one. First one would be scout and the second one would be force, or whatever narrative thing your players can come up with. The important thing in a game like this, of course, is always not just leave it to the GM to describe it. Let it be a back and forth, like a dramatic amdram improv session where, you know, you go, I go, GM players. The players say something, you don't say no, you say yes, but the players say, and also we do this, and the GM says, yes, you do, and also, but, and you just keep feeding that forward, rather than just like, bop, unless it's so ridiculous, and say, well, like, you can't do that, but here's what you can do. So you could counter-suggest, maybe, at worst. Okay, you choose a skill roll, you do the skill roll, the amount of successes you get, i.e. 6s on those d6s are successes in this game. 6 successes is basically how much you take off those work points. So in this case, it would have been like 8 work points. So someone might have, say, 2 successes on their roll, so there's 6 work points left, and the other 3 maths can then attempt to roll to reduce it further, and it might not reduce it that session. At the end of the session, you know, there may be work points left, so they haven't completed it yet. It might have to be finished next session. Hey, there you go. So this is more of a campaign that's better suited for a longer play. You'd play it as more of a traditional length campaign, rather than perhaps some of the other books where you could play them, and indeed I did play them, in an accelerated manner. By other books I mean Mutant Year Zero Mechatron and GenLab Alpha, the robot and animal mutant one respectively. So skills, yes. Work points, how many basically before you've completed it, and then the dev bonus. So there's a dev bonus that is then awarded to the arc upon completion of the project. So in the case of the defences, the arc would then get warfare plus 2d6. So that would add on straight away, and that's great. The only other thing that and that's basically a warfare type one. You could come up with a hunting party, a cropland. So, I mean, some of these are going to be very situational. You wouldn't just choose them. They like cannibalism. It's like if you're on the brink of starvation, you could resort to desperate measure. You wouldn't just choose it on the list. Oh, we'll just do it because it's cannibalism. And most of these you can only do once, unless there's a specific thing where it says you can do it more than once. I'd like to make specific note of the one called Zone Expedition. That's a particular one. And with Zone Expedition, there are no dev requirements, there are no skills to use, there are no work points to work towards, and the dev bonus is variable. So basically, the way that works, when you choose Zone Expedition as your project, there's the rules in the book there for basically setting out where you think on the zone it is. You've got some intel on what it could be. What you give the kind of, out of the 4 stats, the kind of bonus that you believe is in that area. And so you state one, and then they just do a little roll to see if they're successful or not, and they go off as little NPCs and go off and travel and do it. And you can carry on with your mission, a completely different way. But of course, you could go with those NPCs to try and help them complete it as well, and then you'd actually play it out rather than narratively just roll a die and see what happens. But maybe it's just quicker to just send them off and see what does happen. If you want to just get going and like double your progress because you're picking up stuff and they're picking up stuff. So great, left hand and right hand working at the same time. But hey, it's up to the group how they're going to play this. So Zone Expedition is a very special kind of project that basically lets you get that information about the zone. I'd probably have them, be able to report back what was kind of in the zone, and whether they got the thing they thought it was. It makes a lot more sense narratively if you are playing on a familiar map. So if you're playing in a territory that's, say, your hometown, your city, or whatever, and they say, okay, that's the point that is the supermarket, not that they necessarily call it a supermarket. It is the mighty Asda, or the mighty Walmart. It is a place where, the tribes come for low cost supplies, and it is being guarded by whoever, by you two who came down in a huge lemon as the final boss. So anyway, so yeah, basically, you can go do that and go with them, and maybe get the thing you thought it was, and because it's Walmart / Asda, then you'd know it's, say, a food one. You could say there, or it could be somewhere where there's a hardware shop or something, or then maybe you could look at the warfare or whatever you might want to call it, or maybe just as much you might be calling it any of them really, I suppose. Any of the tech, I suppose it would be maybe tech. Yeah, so anyway, those are the elements. That's kind of how you run your arc, and all of those things can keep improving. The other thing to just mention is the other expansion books that basically say, oh, well, if you've got the animal mutants in your arc, or the robots characters from Mechatron, or whatever, or the actual human ones from Elysium, if you've got any of these types in your arc, these are the extra kinds of projects that these types bring to your arc. All their kind of skills and all their kind of everything else that they get to bring to your arc. So that's kind of nice. You could actually see a shift, a change in the entire character of the arc, and different kinds of projects that present themselves. Once, say, for instance, something like robots get found, then they get to bring their whole robot-y unique skills to your arc that you never had before, and you can actually see a change take place. I just think it's so very clever the way they've done that. And you know what? That's the arc. That's how it works. And I'll see you at the table. Stat it up.